Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, the May 15th meeting of the Los Osos Groundwater Basin Management Committee. So with that, can you please rise and follow me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Rob, could we have a roll call? Well, I got to move this back a little. Rob, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll start with Director Cody, whom couldn't be here today. He let me know he was out of town, and we were
His
hoping
alternate was not available.
Siphon was not available either.
That's what he had told me.
Okay,
correct.
all right. So we won't have representation from S&T today. Director Zimmer.
Here.
Director Gibson.
Here.
And Chairperson Ohilsky.
Present. Okay, so do we have any board member comments, brief comments, project status updates, or any non-agenda items?
Yeah, I have one comment. It's regarding a water conservation fair on June 23rd. We mentioned this last meeting. It looks like it is moving forward. It's going to be here at the center. It's going to be an interesting, more of a family-style festival that is going to promote conservation. We're actually going to have some contractors, plumbers, people that will actually help facilitate some of the conservation program. So once again, that's June 23rd. It's put on through the chambers, but the purveyors are participating in it to help promote the activity.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, do you have anything?
Nothing, sir.
Okay. All right, I have nothing other than what you just said, so I guess I'll,
All right.
for the sake of expediency, because I know that with the Amgen tour this afternoon, we need to try to get out of here so people that are going northbound,
Can do
the
that.
party to my left
Yeah,
needs to be able
I
to
see
go.
the link. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the consent agenda, there's two items on the consent agenda, the approval of the minutes from the March 20th meeting and the approval of the warrants, budget update, and the invoice register through April of 2019. Do we have any questions? Anything want to be polled? Okay, seeing none, we'll take public comment on the consent agenda items. Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee.
Move approval of consent.
I'll second that.
Okay. Do you want a roll call vote, Rob?
Oh, sure. Give me something to do. Director Gibson.
Yes.
Director Zimmer.
Yes.
Chairperson Ohilsky.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, with that done, then we'll move to item number 6, which is the Executive Director's Report.
Thank you. The purpose of my verbal comments is to supplement the written report that you have in front of you, and for the public, it's posted online. I wanted to focus just for a few minutes on a conversation that we had last time under my report, where we were encouraged, I think, primarily by Director Gibson, to get our relative staffs together and talk about both funding for basin management activities, as well as funding for projects, all the way on out to those projects that are typically considered to be development-related, programs B and D. And we could talk about this a little more on the next agenda item, but we did have that initial staff-to-staff meeting, had a good, robust discussion, and on that first page I provided some thoughts for where we're going, and we wanted to do this within the time that I'm serving as your executive director here in that next 6-month time frame, to come up with a firm funding plan for ongoing BMC administration. And with respect to that, we're really looking at those calendar years that go beyond the groundwater sustainability plans that are being done in other basins, because that's when the funding authorized by the Board of Supervisors shifts. So we want to make sure we have a firm plan on that. And then a funding and an execution plan for every basin infrastructure program, including B and D. So We've been focused on programs A and C with detailed schedules, milestones, updates. We want to expand that and also talk about funding on programs B and D. And then we want to interact with the Los Osos Community Plan. This is a key year for that to occur. I was at Planning Commission just this last week and got to hear Special Condition 6 discussed at our local government level. And, there's going to be a community plan discussion that's happening this year. And now that we finally had the Habitat Conservation Plan, I think it's in the Federal Register now.
To be, and I'll believe it when I see it, but it is to be in mid-July.
Okay. All right. So that's
That's what Carrie told me the other day, so that's.
as close as we've ever been, perhaps.
Well, and we
on
see a
that.
path. We actually see a path. It appears that it's left the confines of the Ventura field office, which is good news.
That is good news. And then a clear governance structure to accomplish these projects. We've talked about a JPA. We want to flesh that out at the staff level, bring it back for a public discussion here over the next 6 months. So these meetings will continue staff to staff, and we hope to bring you good information as the discussion progresses. You have an update on the Los Osos wastewater project. We're nearing the end of the connection process. Flows are still on about the same level they were last month. You got a brief update on the water conservation fair that the major purveyors are putting on. I did think it was interesting. I had one resident bring up a cannabis project out in the ag area, and I know that county staff are going through the issue of how to apply Title 19 to a cannabis project when a lot of the retrofits have historically been focused on the urban areas. So we're keeping an eye on that one, and there could be some interesting policy discussions when it comes to that project. And then a brief update. I did not have the results for the spring 2019 monitoring as of this writing. Those just came back from the lab this morning, so I haven't had time to compile those. I can just tell you that and I'll show you some slides that will augment this, but the chloride metric took a little trip down in this last April compared to in April of the previous year. Not a big drop. In that some watch areas have come to light, particularly in that Pasadena corridor, kind of upstream of the district's 8th Street well. So I'll talk about that a little bit when we go through the annual report and show you some
Rob,
contours.
can I just, in the staff report, or in your report here, it says that you would bring it back, but when was the monitoring actually done? What month was it actually done?
April.
April, okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
and it takes time to get the lab stuff in.
No, I just wanted to know, so it was after the rainy season.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, although I know in the deeper parts of the basin,
Right.
of course, the travel time to get all the way
Right.
down there is.
I just want to know what month we were talking
Okay,
about.
good.
Thank you.
And then you have an updated task list for the executive director, and this will be, I think, a guideline to any new executive director as to the types of things that we're looking at. And we have some adaptive management that we're queuing up that we're going to bring back in June. We took a little pause on that with Cleith Harris because we felt like we had enough information to answer some of the outstanding questions. And based on the recent monitoring data, we want to expand it to talk a little bit more about this monitoring well with increasing chlorides over by the Baywood area. So we'll have some adaptive management thoughts for you next time. And then interesting update on Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and I wish Kathy could be here to present it because I think she went a long way to seeing this through. The Warden Creek Subbasin has been categorized as low priority, and so in that case would not be subject to the preparation of a groundwater sustainability plan or further SIGMA activities. So that's a draft document that DWR just recently released, and you'll see an update there with some maps. But to have a very low priority for that far eastern compartment, as well as the other actions there, hopefully clarifies and cleans up what this committee needs to do in focusing on the plan area as defined by the basin plans. So we felt like that was good news. And I'm happy to answer any questions on my report.
Yep, go ahead.
So thank you. Thank you, Rob. Do have a couple questions just regarding the budget. Want to thank you for your work. I know staff did get together, dove into that deep. And I think that, one of the important things to talk about is that we knew when we formed this group that there were different agencies, different mechanisms for funding, and that was going to be some challenges that we had to work out. But I know in the ISJ document itself, there's some provisions and written statements and clarifying some of that. So as you're going through and looking at that, if we could make sure that we look at the ISJ and tie what was previously agreed upon and discussed, I think would be really important. The need to fund the BMC operation, if one party declines or has an option to step out, how do we need to take it one step further. So looking at how do we fund it all together if we're all in, but if there is that separation, what happens then at that point? And then, how do we, I think one of the main goals was really to spread the cost equitably throughout the community. Not to necessarily come to a divide of how do we impose it onto water purveyors or the county or some other mechanism, but really looking at it as a community-wide, all members of the community are going to benefit from our projects, and we need to really keep that as the focus, and that was the goal of us coming together and making an agreement. So just wanted to bring that up and talk about it. That's Golden State's objective. The cannabis, you mentioned that project out there. I know a lot of controversy on that cannabis and the water consumption specifically. One of the things, if that could be, if there was some avenue where that could be irrigated with recycled water, maybe some way there may be some benefits from that. So just to keep that in mind as they're moving forward with that project. That's about it for my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And just on that last item, I know that, Bruce, you can talk to this, but there have been some cannabis facilities that have gone forward and been approved where they're hydroponic with completely recycled water. So that may be something, just to piggyback on what Mark's saying, that you guys may want to consider.
I think it's a possibility. The offset. The offset of cannabis in critical basins is a little bit challenging because of the way it's categorized in our land use ordinance. It's thrown in with residential. Ag has its own offset, but ag is under crop production, and grazing has its own set of actually non-regulations. It's pretty wide open. But with cannabis being discretionary permits for every single one, the decision within planning was that then it's subject to the same kind of offsets that houses are, new residences are, and that's that poses an issue because we're learning what the water duty factor on cannabis is, hydroponic or not, inside or outside. It's all yet to be nailed down, and you throw in hemp as another cannabis-like proposition, which is actually regulated more like crop production and grazing. We're working, but I think any of these kind of production facilities that can use recycled water would be great, and we'll look forward to seeing what the opportunities are. Of course, you always have the question of who pays for the infrastructure to get the recycled water from A to B, and we'll see how that goes. In following up Mark's comment on the budget, I agree completely. We know we have basin-wide benefit that needs to be properly assessed. I think we really do need to take those steps into that more complicated question. But you'll notice that in Rob's report, he's talking about the zone of benefit analysis and the question of a joint powers authority. We've talked a little bit about that. let me take the Joint Powers Authority simply as one example of a way which the four parties to this agreement can coordinate their efforts in a solid way. And we think that, I've talked to my staff about some other possibilities of that, but I think the key concept we need to keep at the top of our minds is that in making progress on the remainder of our work plan, we need, I think, to increase the level of coordination, cooperation, and careful planning that we do as a group. We've done a lot of good things as individual entities, and now I think it's time we really need to bring that effort together. So that's my goal in that, and whether it amounts to revisiting the concept of a JPA or some kind of memorandum of understanding, some kind of structure that makes that clear and get the committee's commitment to that, I think those are the important issues that lie ahead of us. So look forward to the conversation.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the status of the zone of benefit portion of your staff report says it very well, quite frankly, but I think addressing both of those concerns, because we do have to really look at what the ISJ laid out as the groundwork and then just move forward from that point. Okay, so we'll take public comments on the executive director's report. Got to do my 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I'll start with this question of JPA or MOA or what have you. And I'd like to remind this committee that the infrastructure projects we have ahead of us are not all that expensive in the aggregate. The basin management plan has numbers in the tens of millions. I remember one number of about 30 million. We're nowhere near that. We need to raise, and we are doing so, that is the respective purveyors, the LOCSD, through water rates, and so is Golden State. So I think we want to keep it simple. We don't want to create entities that are consuming of resources unnecessarily. And I think that if the goal is to get at literally the handful of rural property owners that are using water and via their wells, I think we might want to think about another way to have them participate in creating a big, massive governance structure. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the cannabis application that is in for a land use permit. And I would object 100% to the use of 1 drop of treated effluent for that new project. They have no existing water on their property. They're a dry land farmer. So I would object to these folks getting treated effluent like I would any other dry land farmer. They have no right to the water. And I've been following a number of cannabis applications throughout the county, especially in Paso and Nipomo, and these folks are offsetting their use, typically on a 2-to-1 basis, by removing avocados, cucumbers, almonds. They're taking agriculture out of production to make an exchange for the required water for the cannabis. That's okay. But we don't have that kind of an arrangement in Los Osos. We should have something similar, and maybe some refinements to the policy need to be crafted, or the ordinance, but it's highly ambiguous, and the applicant in this instant case really doesn't know what to do, and the planning department doesn't know what to tell them to do. What I know for sure is that I don't want the ag users on the east side of the creek coming over here on the west side and engaging in any kind of water conservation. Stay on their side of the creek, exchange other irrigated agriculture users to create the water you need. That's my belief. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on the executive director's report? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back for further discussion by the committee.
I was just curious as to whether you have firm plans for further conversations with staffs of the different member entities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think prior to the next meeting, we'll have additional discussion. We have a discussion on the legal framework set up for, I think, Monday.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. Anything? Okay, can I have a motion to receive and file, please?
So moved.
Moved by Committee Member Gibson and
Accepted.
seconded by Mr. Zimmer. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Okay. We'll move on, Rob, to action item 7A, update on the status of the Basin Plan infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you have a written report in front of you. And I'll give a brief update, knowing that we wanted to preserve some time for the annual report at the end, where I do have a more formal presentation. I think the big changes from our last meeting include on our Requested by the Sea monitoring well. Bids are coming back tomorrow. So we'll get to see whether that $115,000 budget is sufficient to cover what we propose there, and we hope it is. But we'll let you know either way how those come out tomorrow. So it's likely that prior to the funding and implementation of that well, if the CSD is willing, and I think they will be, to be the owner of that well, then there would be a funding agreement that would need to be executed with the county to access the CASGIM funding that the county is looking to set aside. So a couple of nuts and bolts before we can actually award that, but we do hope to bring that back in June for further action and to a subsequent CSD meeting for consideration of owning that well. But the important thing is it needs to be owned by a public agency, and if the county participates, there needs to be an agreement to access those CASGIM funds. The district continues to pursue its Program C expansion well, and there's, as I said in my written report, there's a detailed plan in front of the school district that's been there for some time now. We followed up with them again last week, and they said it's been being reviewed by management, and it speaks to exactly where the test well is going to be placed and how we're going to impact operations in a very short period of time there and then restore everything. And so their approval is still pending, but we are still hoping to drill that test well, get it out to bid, and drill this summer. So if we end up needing some upper level help on that issue, we'll be calling on some of you to help us with school district leadership there. But they didn't oppose the well, but it's a little outside what they're used to, so I think that's why they're taking more time on it. The district is still pursuing their Program A well grant funding. That's bid ready, ready to roll, and the state's been slow to release those grant dollars, and you have an update there. And then in future discussions, again, we're not addressing programs B and D in detail, other than to remind folks that Program B has already been implemented on some level through the efforts of Golden State. But as we meet staff to staff, get a deeper understanding of the community plan and its funding, we're going to bring forward more detail on those projects. Be happy to answer any questions.
Mark, do you have a question? You don't have to have one.
No, I do. I'm just trying to frame the question because we're talking a lot about the budgets and earlier discussions, so I'm trying not to say the same thing twice. Yeah. But regarding the staff and the agenda, we bring back this table and we talk about this table. One of the things we were looking at were the projects inside the table. I know there were dollar amounts listed for completed projects, and then we took it out. I believe at the request of Golden State was supporting that, but now with all the focus on the money and the expenditures and the purveyors versus community, I think it would be important to put it back just so that the members do know how much the purveyors are actually doing and putting forth and what is included in their rates. We heard one public comment talk about the rate structures, and both agencies have went through and adjusted their rates, but that's not to say that it's done in the same manner or equitable amounts or anything like that. Not that was the reason for taking it out, is we didn't want to focus in on that. But I think it is important for the community to know how much effort is being put out there and what items are taking place. There's also a second component that there's items that are taking place outside of these. These ones were items that were identified in the basin plan, but there's a management strategy of that we've had in place that have also incurred substantial costs for managing the basin to date, and none of those dollar amounts are listed in there. So I just wanted to make that statement, but also maybe in your discussion with staff, discuss bringing those dollar amounts back into the table.
Great. Yeah, easy to do.
All right.
Fine.
Thank you. Okay, public comment on 7A, please.
Good afternoon, Jeff Edwards. Your general manager mentioned about
Our
the school board.
executive director.
Executive director, forgive me.
Never want to be the GM, sorry.
Your executive director talked about the Pismo test well and suggested that you might want to do a little prodding of the school board members. I would urge you to do that tomorrow. This project's going to take forever, this Program C well. This is a test well. If it's done in summer, the results are not immediately forthcoming. There has to be more analysis, some engineering, if the decision is even to proceed on a permanent well at that location. If the decision is not to proceed, then you're back to square one. So I urge you to shorten the timeline, get a hold of school board members tomorrow, please, and urge them to ask their staff to wrap this up. This is a right of entry agreement. It's fairly simple. There's no liability on their part, no cost. This is a no-brainer. Please call them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll close it and bring back to the committee.
Carry on. Let's get to the budget.
It's coming.
Okay, so other than the questions that you had, there's no additional input? All right, move on to 7B.
Excellent. So 7B is the third iteration, part 3 of the budget discussion for our 2019 budget. To remind you, we had approval of items 1 through 7 in the budget. Basically, all of the administrative tasks plus monitoring were already approved, and in fact, we're already proceeding on those items. We had several items that incurred significant discussion. There was a decision last time to go ahead and leave the specific conservation expenditures to the individual purveyors, so that item has been pulled out of the budget. And then we had 3 remaining items to address. There's been staff-to-staff discussions and quite a bit of work on this. And we think we have a resolution with comments. So focusing back on those 3 items, the first that I'd like to address is the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well, that $115,000 expenditure. As I said before, all parties have agreed to participate. We just need to make sure we go through the steps of getting the proper agreements in place before we actually fund the construction of the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well. With respect to the 2 studies that were contemplated, the creek recharge and replenishment study for $50,000, the stormwater and perch water recovery for $15,000. Both of those projects, I think, are a priority for the committee. You've talked about them before, but these are some significant dollar amounts. And there was discussion of whether these would just simply be dropped off the budget, whether the county would participate with in lieu services, and whether, frankly, the PUC would even approve that, which has become more doubtful. And based on staff input, it does appear that the county, under certain conditions, can find funding for those 2 studies. Conditions aren't onerous. We think we can deal with them. Basically, they need separate and clear invoicing on that and clear visibility on those projects so that they're really viewed as studies of the flood control district that they're participating in. We just need to make sure we cross the T's and dot the I's with how that administrative flow of the finances goes, and I think we can do that. But with that caveat, staff believes we're ready to approve this budget as proposed in a pretty clean fashion. Items 8, 9, and 10 is what we're asking for action on. So,
Thank you. Mark?
Sure, thank you. Just want to thank the county for stepping up and considering that, finding a mechanism. I know how challenging that can be at sometimes, so I'm glad it worked out. And I think it's really important to, my understanding of these projects, the creek discharge, the studies were really, this is seed money to keep these projects alive. And so I think that one of the unfortunate things that could have happened was that we stopped that process, then we pick it up at some point, and now we got a long journey to go through the permitting process. One of the things that I do have a question regarding that is, so we do this initial study, are we going to come across additional requests for studies? Or, because this, in my mind, was an avenue that would put us in a place where we could start seeking some type of a grant funding, or put us in a better position to get some relief in funding and some mechanism. So just really looking at the question is, what is our next step for these projects? Will we have additional studies to do, or is that to be determined from the outcome of these studies?
Right. On the stormwater recovery, I think you will be transitioning into a grant mode there as soon as this $15,000 is expended. You'll have a nice project description, benefits, costs. I mean, that's really going to put you in a good place to look at implementation on that project.
Okay.
The creek discharge, as you've seen in some of the previous discussions, we could spend $500,000 to get all the way through to being kind of more of a shovel-ready project. It's a stepping stone in that direction. We're going to take the lowest lying fruit, the most strategic step, in the hope of raising our visibility for grants. But I can't tell you that will be shovel implementation ready at that point. It's baseline monitoring, it's soil aquifer treatment are the two focus areas for that $50,000. It's expensive.
Yeah.
It's an expensive undertaking. We'll bring that back in detail, of course, before we actually spend that money.
Okay. Yeah, that was a follow-up question, is that we're going to be reviewing our budget. One of the things we talked about earlier was having a plan. And so if we could look at those steps and have them included in the plan, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. You have anything, Bruce?
Yeah, I agree in having a plan, and it may get to a point as we coordinate our efforts and really dig into our work plan. Maybe good to have a one sheet on all of the projects that are potentially going forward, what the study phases are, what the implementation requirements are, what the Gantt chart looks like, when are these things actually going to get done, and where are the off ramps if we don't choose to do it. I just wanted to thank our county staff for being creative and flexible in looking at sources of funding. It boiled down to a small amount of money, $7,000, and I was not directly involved in the meetings to discuss this, but the thought that for want of $7,000 we would delay studies on two promising projects that I think we need to keep moving on was something we didn't want to see happen. But I will say, and this is again part of the package of my comments regarding the future here, as we actually get into, we can justify providing information for projects, and in fact the county's done that a lot. As we get closer to implementation, the county not being a water purveyor starts to stretch our nexus to get this done. And so that is what motivates me to really want that coordinated plan to outline how these things are going to work. I was talking to staff about the conversations that we have. I'll just be honest, I was disappointed that the county's in lieu costs were not going to be considered as contribution here, because the county staff does a ton of work on this effort, and I think we're benefiting from work that was done from the wastewater project, frameworks and structures that are set up within our public works department to carry this forward. So again, part of the conversation of the overall approach to this and the coordinated approach to this rightfully should be another examination of the contributions of county staff that aren't specific, that aren't reflected in cash. So, but again, for today, I'm supportive of this. Again, I appreciate that we've found this small amount of money that keeps these things going, and let's dig in on the bigger questions. Thank you,
Okay, we'll take public comment on this item, please. 7B. Okay, seeing none, we'll close it and bring it back for adoption of the remainder of the budget, which is 8, 9, and 10.
Yes, sir.
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Second. We'll take a roll call vote, Rob?
Director Gibson.
Yes.
Director Zimmer.
Yes.
Chairperson Olhilsky.
Yes. Okay, item 7C, which is consideration of the consider the draft request for qualifications for BMC Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did roll this out last time, and the document was picture perfect since I received no comments. I think it was
picture perfect.
Oh, good. That's what we like. We did lay out a schedule here on the first page of the staff note, and basically we were hoping to get approval of this RFQ here today and have statements of qualifications due by the end of June. And we're hoping to encourage consultants not to go for volume over quality here, and let's keep this streamlined all the way through in the spirit of what we try to do here in our meetings. Interviews and selection in July of this year, and then finally come back to you in August for selection, so that even if this slips to September, we have a couple of months of overlap. Not that I'm going anywhere, but they can actually participate in some of those final agenda items towards the end of the year and do a good handoff. I've had a chance to discuss with the various legal folks how we best accomplish the selection process. And in order to avoid having to have all the discussions, interviews, and other activities here in a Brown Act public setting, which is a little more difficult and unwieldy to interview multiple consultants. Not that we aren't willing to do that. We didn't want to have committee members, particularly not from the two heavy hitters from the district and Golden State, in those meetings, because they comprise, any two of you comprise a majority. And it wasn't perhaps perfectly clear, but what is clear is if we do it at the staff level, you can each appoint a staff person to participate. I would, of course, participate. S&T, if they like, because there's such a small percentage, they can participate. But we would hope to do this at a staff level, come to a recommendation, ranking, and we'll provide all that ranking and then a recommendation for selection. So that's how we'd like to roll with it, and we'd like if possible, your approval of the process here today.
I have a question. John, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
All right.
For interviews for personnel, those are not Brown Act, do not have to be held in the open, because when we interview for hiring people, we don't do that in public. We just do the hiring in public, but the interviews are done in closed session.
That's true. I need to check to see if the exception is limited to employees as opposed to independent contractors, which I believe it might be, because this RFP, it's an independent contractor for a general manager position, essentially.
Yeah.
So I just need to double check to see if that closed session exemption is limited to employees only. So I'll follow up with Erica on that.
Yeah, because I think, to me, if we're allowed to do that, which I think we are, that I would prefer that the entire committee be involved in those interviews.
Okay.
But that's something, we'll just wait till we get a determination back, and then we can figure out how to provide that. But I think having staff in the room, as obviously you, is important. And then I think probably just taking the chair and the vice chair, if we can only do two, not to violate the Brown Act, but have all four if we can do it that way. That's the only point I would make. Other than that, I think it looks great.
And we can get it on the street and have folks go ahead and propose, and the exact selection process can be a little
No, that's
fluid.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We can determine that as we move forward through the process.
Yeah, good.
Okay, and just one follow-up. So the selection of the consultants and then how you're going to process the solicitation of them, will the staff also be involved in that portion of it, or just coming back?
Yeah, I'll do all that. I'll get it out to the consulting community
And
collect the proposals.
And so will the process be, will you share that with the staff, I guess?
Absolutely.
For their input is
Absolutely.
really what we want to see happen.
Yeah.
Because I think it is important to have the staff there. And, okay, that's all the question I really have. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You have anything, Bruce?
I'm prepared to move forward either pattern.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, okay, let's go ahead and take public comment on 7C, consider draft request for qualifications of BMC Executive Director. Sounds like we're ready to approve it today. If we get public comment on that item. Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the committee.
Make a motion to approve the RFQ as stated.
Second.
With the understanding that as we move forward in the process, we'll actually determine how the interview process occurs.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, Rob, 7D,
Great.
the draft 2018 annual report. Bruce keeps looking at his watch. I got to
Yeah.
beat Amgen.
That's
I'm
all right.
moving-
We're good.
I'm moving
We're
us
good.
along here.
We're good.
I'm going to go ahead and get this
Oh, look, there's some bicyclists in
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
live shot from Morro Bay.
And it's not that I'm bitter that I can't be at the VIP tent like I would otherwise be. So. Yeah, it is, in its own particular way.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. For those of you who haven't had a chance to access the electronic file for this, the full report is available at slowcountywater.org. Go to the lower right-hand corner and click on Los Osos Basin Management Committee, and you'll find the full text of the report as part of the agenda package for this meeting. I did have one request before the meeting to separate out the annual report so you could really see that you were clicking on the annual report. I thought that was good. I'm going to go ahead and do that. But you can, it's 27 megabytes of fun, and you can access it at that location. This is only an overview of the contents of the report. We're not asking for any action here today. Just hitting the highlights, give you an opportunity to make comments. If you're doing detailed review, we'd love to get those in about a two and a half week time frame, maybe that by that first week in June. Let's give our consultant as much time as possible to address those comments, because if we can't have this done in time for our normally scheduled June meeting, we're going to have a special meeting at the end of the month to get it in time for the court. So just a few slides to remind folks that we have a detailed monitoring network for both our upper and lower aquifer areas, as well as even some of our shallow perched water areas. There in orange, I think you can see it, towards the middle of the screen, is the Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well area. At this point, we're focused on that as a lower aquifer well, but that's the area we're looking at. Our lower aquifer network is there in front of you. And I wanted to see if folks could just, let me see if I can get my cursor up there. There at the end of Pasadena Avenue down by downtown Baywood is a well we called LA11. That is a deep, deep Zone E monitoring well. And you're going to hear that come up in the discussion a couple of times. So I wanted to point out LA11. This is a cross-section of the basin, and this is old hat to a lot of people here, but for the public, there are 3 aquifer zones that we primarily focus on, and starting from the bottom 2, zone D and E there in a kind of a green and a blue, we generally term our lower aquifer. All of our production, with the exception of one purveyor well, is in zone D. And then there's one well that has some screenings in Zone E. And then Zone C is our upper aquifer, where, again, we have a number of production wells that tend to be of concern for nitrate. And that's why we have nitrate removal in several Zone C wells. In the yellow there, you'll see the creek alluvium, and that is where the creek is attached to our lower aquifer, to Zone D. And that's why we're interested in creek discharge, because there's that direct connection between the creek alluvium and the lower aquifer that occurs in that isolated area within the Los Osos Creek bed. This is a slide we present every year that speaks to groundwater production. And this is production overall, and it's fairly flat from 2017. But it's always interesting to look back at the early 90s to see how far we've come. We're literally producing 1,000 acre-feet less in total from the basin than we were in the 90s. We break up production into different aquifer zones. This is the western area production. Again, fairly flat compared to last year. Central area, flat from last year. And eastern area, flat. So essentially status quo in terms of what we're producing and where we're producing it from. Rainfall patterns, folks tend to forget that we did have a dry spell. If you look at the right side of that chart, you'll see that there was a dip in rainfall for the period in question for this annual report. Of course, after this, we had a fairly good solid rainfall, which will be reflected in the next annual report for 2019, since a lot of that rainfall occurred after January. We have a number of interpretive graphs that occur in the annual report, and those often come out in the form of water level contours. And I just wanted to provide a couple of editorial comments. Within our upper aquifer, I wanted to note that water levels are generally up. And for the key central area where most of our upper aquifer production is occurring, we're up about 5 feet compared to where we were in fall of 2017. So year over year, upper aquifer appears quite healthy with water levels rising. And you can see towards the coast there, we've got a nice seaward gradient. So there's always water flowing from the basin into the ocean, which is what you want, of course, because once that stops and reverses, you get seawater intrusion. So upper aquifer is healthy at this point. Lower aquifer, a couple of interesting features there. In the lower left, I said a ridge that resists seawater intrusion. And really, it's the pressure of the water levels, that keeps seawater at bay. And you see in that contour feature, and if you're not familiar with contours, there's a feature there that reflects a mound that sort of separates our urban core from the west side. And that mound has been protective of seawater. That's why you see in some of our monitoring wells and in our chloride metric this continual dropping in overall chloride levels. That mound's had a lot to do with it. As you go into the middle of Baywood, you'll see a depression there that is better than it was in 2016, about 15 feet higher, but still a depression. And it really hasn't changed from 2017. And the only thing I wanted to note there is that under adaptive management, this is a watch area for us. If you look at that, what we call the critical watch area, at the Pasadena monitoring well, we do see evidence of chlorides in that well. We've seen it for years. We see those chlorides, even as the metric drops. In that one specific area, we see the chlorides increasing slowly. But of concern that distribution of pumping in that area may not be optimized. And so that's something that we're going to be bringing back to you here this year under adaptive management. The chloride metric is a very helpful metric, but we also need to think well by well in a basin like this that's had seawater intrusion. It's like you protect your house, but then the person breaks in the back door. So seawater front, something that we show every year. We are showing a retreat in that front compared to 2017. It's a minor retreat, and it's significant when you compare it to 2015. The goal there, and when you pull this up online, you can see it in living color, is to get that front retreated all the way back out of the urban area and rewinding the clock from before 2005. So we're not there yet, but every year we make a little bit of progress. In any of these discussions, I want to note there's going to be, it's a battle. There's going to be reversals. There's going to be dry years. There's going to be things that surprise us. It's so important that we remain vigilant, not only on overall metrics, but on area by area examination. Again, you see the critical watch area. Chlorides are up in the 160 range. So we need to keep our eye on Pasadena and that monitoring well. But it's fairly good news for this annual report. I didn't see if Lindy Owen was in the audience. If you are, Lindy, raise your hand. You're not there. I had some great comments for Lindy. But the idea of the amount of storage that's in our aquifer is something that's important to Department of Water Resources. We do report that to them. It's important for the long-term analysis of the basin. When you have a seawater intrusion situation, you can lose capacity in your basin. Even though it continues to have water in it, it's just degraded to the point where you can't use it. And so this chart attempts to track how much storage we're either gaining or losing. And in the scheme of things, is a very minor change between 2017 and 2018. But we did restore a small portion of our lower aquifer, as you see reflected there. What we will continue to say is people will ask, where's the front? We can answer that. They'll ask, where's the front going to be if we don't change anything? We can answer that. What we can't answer is how long it will take to achieve a different condition under certain scenarios. Our model is not what they call a transient or time-based model. It's steady state. So we can tell you where we're going and where we'll end up, but we can't tell you how long we'll get there. That's more speculative on behalf of our experts. So when you hear the public ask, well, if it's very dry for 10 years, where will we end up? Again, we can't necessarily answer that question in detail. We can give you trends, but not definitive modeled results. It's about $125,000 to get to the point where we can give you definitive model results. Break for a drink here. So transitioning to the basin metrics, we have our basin yield metric. And this metric basically says if you were producing everything that you could for the safe yield of this basin, that would be 100, or essentially 100%. So if we take all the water that the basin has to offer without further impacting us with seawater intrusion, that would be a 100. In the basin plan, we set a goal of 80 to keep a 20% contingency to make sure we're achieving our goals. And under this current year, we have a 2018 value of 74. So we remain under 80. We've been there a number of years. And as you can imagine, that's why we see the metrics improving, is because we're within there. But in order to be... Oh, we just crashed. That was fun. And give me a second here, and I'll get us back. And we're back. Yeah. I had blue screen of death one time, and that is not fun in a public meeting. Okay.
There you are.
So in order to be successful with this approach, we have to match our actual production strategies with the model. So when we come back in future adaptive management discussions, you're going to hear us talk about things like, well, the long-term model says we can produce 100 acre-feet from this well. We're doing 150 for various operational reasons. But over time, year to year, it doesn't matter that much. But over time, we have to harmonize our field operations with the model. This becomes very important when we talk about borehole contamination, which is coming up here in a second. And again, the Baywood area needs to be carefully watched. So one of the activities that we wanted to cover in this annual report is what to do with some of our lower aquifer wells that appeared to be experiencing some level of nitrate influence. So this is a diagrammatic depiction of a well. And you'll see there on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll have the different zones, Zone C, Zone D, and the regional aquitar there you can see if you turn your head sideways. And that's the clay layer that separates Zone C and Zone D. Now, if you have a well is essentially a piece of pipe that penetrates all the way down to the depth of our lower aquifer, it must go through that clay layer. And when it does, you have a responsibility to seal that up to keep those layers distinct, but that seal is never perfect. And when we have water levels in the upper aquifer that are higher in pressure than the lower aquifer, we can have some leakage that occurs in these wells. And we've noticed this both in Golden State and in district wells. If the well sits and there's no production, borehole leakage becomes a reality. As long as there's production, it lessens that effect, and we don't see the nitrate in the final outcome. So this often is a very minor issue. Nitrates are managed. They remain below thresholds, well below thresholds. But when you're talking about something as sensitive as a chloride metric, where you're looking at fine levels of chloride, particularly where we're, in the case of one of our wells, we double the effect of that well as part of the metric, it can become sensitive to this effect. And had quite a bit of discussion last time, but we do think we've solved it and have a method. It's in Appendix J, if you just want to read that section. It's not a lengthy section. We're glad that it appeared we have a workaround that's more straightforward than what it could have been. And I won't go through this in fine detail because it would take too long, and those of you who aren't excited about talking about statistics for a long time probably wouldn't be too interesting. But in essence, we looked at nitrate levels in these wells, and we looked at chloride levels, plotted them on a chart as you see here, and we looked for correlations. And what we found, or what Cleith found, is that when nitrate levels are low, meaning the influence from the upper aquifer is low, there was almost no correlation. We just did not see influence in the chloride levels resulting from that leakage. And it actually presented a fairly clear and bright line at around 2 milligrams per liter of nitrate. If we had less than that, we really didn't feel like we had influence on our chloride levels. As you got beyond 2 milligrams per liter, we started to see a pretty clear straight line correlation. As nitrates went up, chlorides would proportionately drop. And so that influence became clear. Now, fortunately, in the case of this particular well, LA10 or lower aquifer 10, we had a lot of data. There's monthly samples taken beyond what the Basin Management Committee does, thanks to Golden State for providing that data. And it allowed us, even though we didn't necessarily have a data point in April, we allowed us to look at May, look at June, and come to a determination that was very close as to what those chloride levels should have been to balance this metric, and that's exactly what we did. To look back in the years when this well has been pumped very little, which is when this became more of an issue, we went back, corrected those numbers. The chloride metric's still dropping, it's just the levels have been adjusted to reflect correction for borehole influence. And so there's some management strategies that were suggested, and these are bittersweet. Production of 2 acre-foot per month was recommended as the minimum to avoid this influence in this particular key production well that we happen to also use for monitoring. That's contrary to the strategy of producing as little as possible from this well. So you have this paradox to deal with. Now, 2 acre-foot per month is not a lot of production, but in the spirit of what we're trying to do, we're not just ready to say, hey, Golden State, make sure you produce 2 acre-foot per month at least on this. We're not ready to say that yet. So this is something staff is still grappling with as to what the right answer is. Of course, if we had another 115,000, we just go plop in another monitoring well, completely sealed against that regional clay, and then this is a non-issue. But this is a deep monitoring well and will not be cheap. So no easy solution to this. We do feel like we have a workaround for this year. And for future years when that well is being produced, if we simply turn off that well for whatever reason, then we're likely to lose this as a beneficial point of lower aquifer monitoring. Now, our new Cuesta by the Sea well is still in this general area, and so that certainly will be a helpful data point and will probably be added to the chloride metric, and it won't have this particular influence. But it shows this issue of having dedicated monitoring wells versus production wells. The more you can have dedicated monitoring wells, the better your metrics will be. So here's the adjusted metric. The chloride metric remains essentially flat from 2017, and again, we do expect that when we bring back our April results from a few months ago, we're going to see that drop a little more. The water level metric is in blue up there, and you see it continues its strong recovery, which is what we really want to see basin-wide, a smooth and continuous trend, and we want that to continue to go. Now, some of the thresholds there you'll see in red. The 100 milligram per liter threshold is where we want to get for the chloride metric, which is shown in red. We want to get down to that level, and we feel like we can get there. And the water level metric, we want to get all the way up to that blue target. So basically good news for calendar year 2018. We also have a new water level profile that we're using for the upper aquifer, and you'll see the limits of that profile, which is a very fancy chart here. I won't go into this in too much detail. I'll just say that the level that's shown in red is the theoretical protective elevation, very conservative. We want to make sure that actual water levels, particularly in the areas that we produce from, remain above that level. And in general, they do. We had one watch area that we still think is safe. We're doing more production from that zone, but this chart will be updated year over year so we can look at trends. This is the first annual report that it would appear. So we're looking forward to bringing this back. But basically, it's all good news in the upper aquifer. We are protective of seawater intrusion. Next steps, our wellhead survey contract's been confirmed here, and we'll have results from Twin Cities surveying here in the coming months, and that could result in slight recalibrations of some of the reference points. We do want to get that Cuesta by the Sea monitoring well drilled, which is shown there in the orange. We do hope to accomplish that this year. And again, a couple of weeks, if you could have your staffs look at this report, give us that detailed input, and we'll produce both a clean version and a red line. And there'll be some refinements to some of our adaptive management. Want to have more staff-to-staff discussions on this issue of borehole contamination versus production before we really call Chapter 10, our adaptive management chapter, complete. And then again, as in previous years, we need to complete programs A and C as soon as possible without easing up on that progress. Focus on that Baywood area, and particularly lower aquifer monitoring well 11. Address under adaptive management this threat of nitrates in our lower aquifer. And we do have a better understanding even now than we did 6 months ago. Continue to optimize the use of recycled water. We look forward to that occurring both at Sea Pines and first at Los Osos Middle School, then as soon as possible at the other schools. And however we need to get there in terms of funding, strategy, that's a very high benefit to seawater intrusion, getting those schools off of potable water onto recycled water for their turf irrigation. And then again, we may need to consider a special meeting in June, depending on the voluminous nature of the comments received and how much time we need to turn those around. But if we can do this all in our regular meeting, that's what we'll do. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Mark?
So I was wondering if it would be possible to have Toby Moore come up and make a couple comments.
Yeah.
Toby Moore is our water resource manager and chief hydrogeologist, and he's actively involved in the annual report and could probably speak better than I could on our comments.
Toby, you want to come up?
Staff relies heavily on Mr. Moore's advice.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Toby Moore, Water Resources Manager with Golden State Water Company. I just wanted to follow up on the discussion about the borehole leakage issue in LA 10, especially as we start looking at the annual report. We will be digging deeply into the report in the next couple of weeks and getting staff level comments on it. But I do want to just point out that this particular well is seeing the benefit of the basin management program. So this is actually the Rosina well, which has reduced production because we've now implemented the blending program utilizing our Skyline well and the Rosina well. We've implemented a nitrate treatment. We've added an expansion well out to the east. And so the recommendation that you're seeing in the draft report to pump this well at a nominal production would be counter to those particular actions. I know that that would give us a better metric, but there are other ways to deal with it, and that's what we'll come back with. Just to get you thinking about it, we could work out a program where the twice-a-year sampling for this metric, we will increase that production for some pre-described period to essentially evacuate any impacts from the upper aquifer leakage down into the lower aquifer. So I just want to make you aware of that, and we'll be providing comments as we review the report. But there are workarounds in addition to whether we put a dedicated monitoring well at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. You have anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, Bruce?
No, I would just say I appreciate that, and that was the thought that I had. You know, basically you run the well to flush out the contamination, and then you take a measurement. But I think there's also, this situation gives us a strong impetus to get a monitoring network in place that works, and not try to double it up against the production wells. This is just all part of the cost of managing this basin. Is going to have good observations of the reality in the subsurface there. So, you know, if that causes us, and I wonder, does the Cuesta by the Sea well replace this well as a monitoring well?
Because this well occurs in that submarine canyon, it's so strategically positioned, I would say no. It fills a gap, but doesn't really replace it.
Yeah. So any of the creative ways in which we can optimize the production from that well and optimize the accuracy of its observations, absolutely. I think that'd be great.
Okay, so public comment?
Good afternoon again. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I wanted to make just a quick clarifying comment. The alphabet soup of basins and plans are a little confusing. So just to be clear, the Basin Management Plan, Program B, deals with Zone C of the basin. And Program C of the Basin Management Plan is working towards locating wells in the strata that is represented by zones D and E. So just a little, clarification there. I'd like to note that the safe yield of the basin, by virtue of the Los Olivos Golden State Water Company well, is elevated now to 2,760 acre-feet a year. That's modeled, so it's not definitive, and this is what the computer's telling us. I would like to note that though we're going to be seeing slight increases in the basin yield, the safe yield of the basin, we're also seeing unprecedented reductions in consumption. And in contrast, or a little bit contrary to your executive director's point about this total demand being just over 2,000 acre-feet a year, I believe we've actually brought it down to just under 2,000 acre-feet a year. What that would mean is that the basin yield metric has dropped from 78 in 2016 to what I calculate just over 70 right now, 70.6 to be more exact. So we're seeing safe yield up, ratchet up, and then we're also seeing demand drop, which is just producing these very good results. And in fact, the urban area, we can expect to see additional conservation on the order of up to 200 acre-feet. So our urban usage could be down to as low as 650 acre-feet per year, as in contrast to what was 1,900 acre-feet 20 years ago. So huge drops in demand. And in fact, I think the availability or safe yield as it relates to the demand is going to be such that we can deal with programs B and C in the basin, especially if we get the second of the two program C wells. I don't think we're going to need any program D activity. So for build out or whatever our demands are. So I'll offer that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back. I think it's a good report.
Thank you, sir.
Look forward to staff's comments.
Right. We'll get you comments, not today, you've got some comments today, but our various staffs will get you comments for hopefully approval at the June meeting, and if we have to go to a special meeting, then we will.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good.
So I just want to put the staffs on notice. They need to get comments back to you as soon
2
as
weeks.
they can. Correct. Time's running. Okay, so public comments for items not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, then we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Yeah, you're going to make it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I wanted to just thank the public for coming, and then thank the various staffs for coming today. I know that it's time out of your day, and I also want to thank John for filling in for Erica today. So with that, then we'll adjourn. Thank you.